When I first moved to the Netherlands, I found it extremely confusing how to get mental health help here. I decided to make a video series interviewing local psychologists, asking them about mental health here. How to get mental health help, what types of help are available, how to navigate conversations about mental health with your employer, how to get diagnosed here in the Netherlands, and many other topics related to mental health. Today we are joined by a Dutch psychologist working in Eindhoven, Kim Gijsbers. Hi Kim, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of people asking themselves whether they know when they need help. And I know from my own experience is that when I came to a psychologist, I was like, am I just wasting your time? Because my issue is not serious enough. It's hard to know whether you really need help or not. And that basically the question is, how do I know that I need professional help?
Well, I think, firstly, if you're asking yourself that question, might be a good basis to start. A lot of people feel like, oh, I need a diagnosis, or I need to have been sad or depressed for a very long time in order to really need help, or I need to basically be indeed suicidal or something like that in order to get to a psychologist, but that's not necessarily true. So yeah, if you think you need help or you notice a recurring pattern in your behavior, that you feel like you can't get out on your own, it's reason enough to ask for help.
Is there a time frame that I know that, okay, after 3 months of having a recurring thought or recurring pattern, this is the moment for me to ask for help?
It's difficult to put a timestamp on, but what I can tell you is that, for example, in order to classify for the diagnosis of a depression, someone has to feel sad most days than not for a period of 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So that's actually already pretty short.
2 weeks, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, just 2 weeks.
To classify for the diagnosis of depression, you need to meet the criteria, which there are a few. A good measure, if you feel like you need help, is if you try it on your own and you notice, okay, I'm not feeling well, I've done a few things to try to solve it, and it doesn't help. It could be a good point to ask for help outside of yourself. But for lots of psychological disorders, the measurement is that it needs to start impairing your daily life. If you have a diagnosis, it's a pattern of behavior that impairs you in your daily life or someone else, but it's often the person themselves, and it starts interfering with your normal functioning. So of course you can be a bit sad, you can still do most things, you can still enjoy going out with friends. Those not necessarily need to be huge alarm bells. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you notice, hey, I'm having trouble concentrating at work, or I have trouble getting up, I'm taking care less of myself, I'm not eating well, I'm not sleeping well, those could all be signs that, hey, if it doesn't help to solve this yourself, it's something you cannot solve yourself, it might be signs to get help from somewhere else.
And is my understanding right that sometimes we don't even need this kind of diagnosis? It can be just temporary support for a few weeks, for a month, to just let us go over this hump, over this rough patch. Yeah. And then it's basically it. It's not like, because I feel like a lot of people think about therapy as this big thing that they need to be involved for years, but it can be just for a couple of weeks, months, and then that's it.
Yeah, so how the Dutch healthcare system works, that if you feel like, okay, something's going on, the best place to go to is your GP. To go to your GP, to tell them your complaints, and your GP's job is to make an estimate of, okay, how severe are the problems, and then it can point you in the right direction. Mm-hmm. There's often also someone else at the GP's office who supports the GP's practice, who can give mental health support. Yeah. In Dutch we call it the praktijkondersteuner.
Yeah. I think it's just below psychologist, right?
It's below psychologist.
Yeah, I think in English between experts we call it nurse. I don't know why, but people just call her or him nurse.
The nurse at the
For some reason.
GP's office, yeah. So someone at your GP's office who can help with mental health complaints as well. So your GP makes an estimate, okay, how serious is the help you might need? And some people, indeed, with a few talks at the nurse at the GP's office can get really far, and they can point you in the right direction in terms of what to look out for, healthy lifestyle tips, also tips on where to look for information.
I remember a few years ago when I was going through something, I came to GP. I did not think that it's mental. I was more thinking that, I don't know, maybe I'm having a heart attack or like some minor heart attack. And that's kind of crazy to think that somebody in her 20s would have that. And then the GP reassured me that it's not physical. You need more something mental health help. And then she pointed me out to see a nurse. And after 2 sessions of seeing her, after I've said something that was alarming to her, she was like, yeah, you need to see a psychologist. And then I got referred to a psychologist.
Yeah. So that really is a GP's job to indeed. And a lot of people think, oh, but I don't have any physical complaints, so I can't go to the GP. But it's a stigma that mental health is not part of health overall. But I think it could help to look less at mental health, okay, that's your own problem or your own doing, but at the same terms as physical illness. So say you fell down the stairs and your leg is hurting, and okay, you say, okay, I can still walk, so it's not that serious. I'll see how it goes for a few days, but the pain gets worse or it doesn't go away after 2 weeks. It would be good to see a GP. And that could be the same with mental health things. That if you feel like, hey, something's going on, I'll try some things myself, but it's not going away, it could be good to seek outside help.
So this brings us to the next question. How do I look for a psychologist? You mentioned already that I need to go to GP, and that's the only route, or what else can I do?
There are multiple routes, but if you want the healthcare to be covered by the insurance, you need a referral from the GP. And then your GP can look, your GP or the nurse at the GP's office can look together with you where you could go for help. Often the GP has a knowledge of the psychologist in your area. If you can just go anywhere, in theory, I think you could, but it depends on which connections your GP has, and it can really be a discussion with them to see where to refer to.
By insurance, you mean this Eigenrisiko, right? That it will be covered from that, and it will never be for free.
Well, how the Dutch insurance works is some things fall under the Eigenrisiko, and some things are immediately covered. So whenever you go to the GP, you will not see a bill. And that's immediately covered by the insurance. But for example, when you go to the hospital for a surgery, you first have to pay your Eigenrisiko, which is each year. Each new calendar year, you need to pay that part if you have healthcare complaints. And the rest of that is covered. So I think it's at a minimum of 300, 400 euros right now. So that's the money it will cost you, at least each new year. But the rest of the care is covered by the insurance, so you don't pay per session the fee.
Because for me, the way it worked, I did not pay anything. And my psychologist explained to me that it was some governmental funding that year where I did not have to pay anything for the sessions. And I had, I think, around 10 sessions with her. And I did not pay anything. And then she said, yeah, now I feel like you are good to go. And if you want extra, you need now to pay. And then it would work the way you explained. But before that, I did not have to pay for some reason.
Not so long ago, I think 1 or 2 years ago, it changed. The Netherlands went from a psychological healthcare system that worked on the, it's really complicated to explain, but the new system is called zorgprestatiemodel. It's something we as psychologists all had to adjust to, which meant for people themselves that they need to pay eigen risico. Before that, it wasn't the case. So it's a bit different now. So that every new calendar year, you need to pay eigen risico.
Okay, that's why.
So that's sense. Also if you start treatment, for example, in November, and you haven't spent your eigen risico on something else that year, you'll need to pay it. And if your treatment continues into January, you'll need to pay that bit again. Yeah. So that's something that changed very recently. So a lot of people might not recognize that they need to pay eigen risico, but it's something that changed very recently.
So just to recap, one route is that I go to GP and then they refer me to a psychologist, and I need to pay my eigen risico first, and then the rest will be for free for me. So covered by insurance. Yeah, so that's the one route. And then the second one, you said that there are multiple.
Yeah, there's multiple routes. Depending on your situation, for example, if you're still studying at university, there are a lot of universities or schools have a student psychologist that can also help you with mental health complaints, and they are they're a little similar to the nurse at the GP's office, but can often give a few more sessions. Not
the nurse at the office, it's more like HBO opleiding, right, or more bachelor. It doesn't matter?
No, it doesn't really matter. That can be someone who has the same education. It's a different specialization education, but it is also someone who has a background in psychology or in healthcare, and who is educated to give, basically short-term therapy or short-term support for people with mental health complaints. The same as student psychologists, there often are psychologists that offer short-term treatment for mental health disorders, and also support with your studies. To know, okay, I'm struggling with my studies, I'm struggling to do exams, that you can go there and they can help you with that.
Kind of stress management.
But also see if they can, for example, help you postpone deadlines, to arrange that you can postpone deadlines until you feel ready to study again. So that's a different route for students. Often you can find it on the school's website, or ask your student advisor for help like that. And then there is the non-insured psychological healthcare, which means that you need to pay for the sessions yourself. And that has some benefits, also has some cons, of course, because a psychological healthcare session, if it's not covered by insurance, can vary from 60 to 225 euros per session. And then indeed, if you need 10 sessions, you'll probably pay 1,000 euros for the help. So that can be more expensive. Only they often have shorter waiting times than the healthcare that's covered by the insurance.
So is there any way for me to get the insurance coverage if I don't want to follow the GP route?
I think you need a referral from the GP to get it covered, or a referral from someone else. It could be a company doctor or a different psychologist. But I think you need a referral from the GP to get it covered by health insurance, or you would have to contact your insurance company yourself to see if your insurance covers that particular psychologist you want to go to.
You mentioned also that there is this option for my company, my work, my employer, to cover my therapy sessions.
Yeah, some employers offer help to cover expenses for healthcare, psychological healthcare. Those will often be the psychologists who are not covered by the regular insurance, and you can get referred to them. It's something to discuss with your company. I'm not sure if you can find it in your arbeidsvoorwaarden, so your contract or something, that they say they have that.
No, I guess it should really impact my work for them to consider that.
Yeah, it's with things like burnout that the employers are willing to cover those things. Or if you had an accident at work and you're experiencing psychological distress from something like that.
And then I guess there is always the option of looking online for a psychologist if you want to speak your own language, for example. Yeah. I know that for some people it's very important to speak their own language, or they think that the psychologist from their home country will understand their childhood a bit better, understand their background a bit better. Yeah, but then it will be online versus...
Then it will probably be online, or you have to find someone in the Netherlands who does speak your language.
Yeah.
Who has the same cultural background. And you can look on the websites of psychologists, and they will often tell you if you need a referral from the GP to go there, or if their pricing, if they have, if you don't need a referral.
Do you think it's beneficial? I have experience with both. I have experience with the Dutch psychologist, and I had to give a bit more context.
Yeah.
But I did not find it particularly disturbing. I thought, yeah, I would just explain a bit and she would understand where I'm coming from, and then we can discuss the psychological issue or my feelings about it. And with the Russian psychologist, I don't have to give that much context, but it's also not that I'm, for the whole session I'm giving context. I just spend, 1 minute of explaining things and then move on.
Yeah, I think that is also a really personal experience. I can also only speak from experience on this issue. I do treat a lot of expats, often in English. I've treated a lot of people from different cultural backgrounds. And yeah, I do notice that I sometimes need to ask a bit more context as opposed to my Dutch clients. But on the one hand, that can also help you understand, hey, why indeed is it this way, where I grew up, and if you have problems that you feel are related to integrating in the Netherlands or how culture is in the Netherlands, that is of course something a Dutch psychologist knows more about.
I love it. I never thought about it from this angle, that basically by explaining the context and by explaining the background story, it also makes you think, like, okay, actually, yeah, it's something that is apparently not normal, right? Because you're asking me for this, you're asking me for clarification, so it's not universal. For some cultures it's different, maybe this culture is actually not working for me, or this particular thing is not working for me.
Indeed, it's not universal, and even with Dutch people, of course, the basics of what a psychologist needs to do is trying to understand this thing you say, what does it mean to you? And of course, a psychologist helps you understand as well. Hey, this thing I do, what is the purpose? What does it mean to me? Why do I do the things I do? And having someone from a completely different cultural background who might ask you more questions because they don't have the same background as you do, might actually help you delve in deeper to, okay, why do I do the things I do? That's also one of my supervisors always says, a more experienced psychologist is not necessarily a better psychologist, because the psychologist needs to ask a lot of questions. And if someone thinks, oh, well, I've seen this type of patient like 50 times before, they might not ask a lot of questions and could overlook things. Whereas someone who might lack a bit of experience and asks a lot of questions could get a really clear understanding. And because we can't look into each other's head unless we talk about it.
Yeah, you just make a lot of assumptions, I guess, right?
Everybody does that every day. And certain assumptions can, of course, lead to mental health problems. But as a psychologist, you need to be aware of your own assumptions as well. that's also what I find really interesting about working with expats, is seeing the Netherlands from a completely different lens, a completely different view.
Can I pick my own psychologist? And how do I know that the psychologist would be within the GP reach, so to say?
So if you go to the GP, your GP will often discuss together with you, because they have a system in which all psychologists that are covered by insurance are registered, and they can often also see what waiting time certain psychologists have. I'm not sure if the system also says, I think about which diagnosis, probably yes, but if I don't know if the system says if treatment in English is available. So that might be something, if you're an expat, to check for yourself on websites, or even call the place and ask them, hey, I might get referred here and I'm an expat, I speak English or a different language. Do you have psychologists available who speak this language?
Because the risk is that I would be waiting for, I don't know, I think the average waiting time is 6-8 weeks. And then
6 to 12.
to 12.
Yeah, it can be up to 12 weeks indeed. Yeah, depending on the place where you go, depending on your problems at this moment. Yeah.
And then so I wait, and then the psychologist doesn't fit me or doesn't work for me. And there is always this risk, right? That you just...
There's always a risk that you don't have a good click with your therapist, but it's often something you can also discuss, and they can see is someone else available. But yeah, for expats, it is good to know if someone does speak your language or the language you prefer.
And there is no this option to just have some sort of a trial session for 10 minutes or anything like that to see if I click with the person?
I think when you go the GP route, I don't know any organizations that offer that. When you go into the uninsured healthcare, you have a lot more freedom to choose where you want to go, who you want to speak with, and you can have something like or just a talk to see, do you fit with the problems they treat? Because of course you pay for it yourself, and if you're not happy, then you don't have to stay.
So the risk could be that I'm waiting for 6 to 12 weeks, and then it's either they don't speak the language, but that's something I can check beforehand.
Yeah, you can check or ask your GP to check for you.
And this is something I cannot really check beforehand.
No.
Just the risk that I have to take.
Yeah, and I think with most psychologists, it's always okay. It's very scary. It's very new. You're expected to tell your problems. You're very private. There's maybe sometimes even problems you're embarrassed about to someone you don't know, which is always scary.
I've heard that it's super scary for a lot of people. For me, somehow it's not. I don't know if they don't know me. It's actually quite easy. It's like this, the train analogy that sometimes people sit with somebody on the train and tell them the whole life, and then they say bye and that's it. Yeah. So for me, it's somehow like this, that I don't really know. And even if they, we don't click or they say something disturbing, because I know cases where psychologists would start giving advice, which is, I think, is inappropriate. Yeah. To me, I feel like I can always leave if I don't like it. Yeah. But I know that for some people...
a thing, but for a lot of people, they're like, oh, I've been waiting for such a long time, I finally get help. But now I need to tell all my problems. Can I trust this person indeed with my problems? Will they help me well? So it can always be a bit scary.
How can I approach the situation? Do I just say one thing and then see how they respond? Or how can I protect myself in this case?
Well, it shouldn't be the patient's thing to have to protect themselves against the psychologist, of course. But if you feel like your psychologist is making comments or doing things that you do not like, try to bring it up with them. To tell them, hey, this thing you do, I don't really like that, and see indeed how your psychologist responds. You could ask him for a second opinion if you feel like something weird is going on. And you as a patient, you're protected by lots of rules that psychologists have to follow. And you can if anything ever goes wrong, you can always file a complaint. Also, often through a lot of institute website, if you feel like this psychologist they don't treat me the way they should.
Because they basically always need to ask for my permission, correct?
To share information, they always need to ask for your permission. Those are a few rules that even with the GP, they need to ask your permission, and you should be able to read, or at least have read to you what someone sends in certain cases.
A friend of mine shared with me that a psychologist, it was a part of therapy where he was going through some memories, and then he started crying, and the psychologist wanted to just pat him on the shoulder, but the psychologist asked if she was allowed to do that. And I think it can be appropriate as a part of therapy, but would you say that they would always have to ask you?
It really depends on the psychologist, because there are we have a how do you call it, beroepscode. So
like a code of
an ethical code for psychologists. We have an ethical code which has a lot of rules, and one of them is that you should not initiate inappropriate physical contact, and that's a really sensitive issue of when is it inappropriate, yes or no. So at least they always learned me, it is better to ask than to assume, and especially if it's about trauma, maybe trigger something else.
One of the expat group, I read a story where a lady was sharing that her psychologist was asking her for some information that she did not understand why the psychologist was asking her that, such as, okay, what's the name of your first love? When did you first time have sex? And she was like writing everything down. That was the first session, and she felt that it was more like interrogation, and she did not understand, because it was her first experience, so she didn't understand if it's appropriate, if it's something that she should do. And then she went with that. But when she got home, she was like, I did not understand what actually happened.
I would say try to bring it up indeed with your psychologist. And even if you go home and then come back the next time and you feel uncomfortable about something, you can try to bring it up. Or indeed ask, well, do I have to give this information? Or why do I have to give this information? And you're always free to say, I'd rather not share. I've treated people with traumas who said, I've never told anyone this, so I don't want to go into detail today. And I was like, I will tell me when you're ready. It's important that people feel safe. Of course, as psychologists, it's always a balance between making someone feel safe and making sure someone is not avoiding, which can be the problem pattern of behavior. But if you as a client ever feel unsafe or unsure, try to bring it up with your psychologist. And indeed, you can always leave. You have the right to leave, and they don't have the right to share your information. So they always have to keep that secret. Also, if you see your psychologist writing everything down, that will be in your file, that will not be shared with anyone without your consent.
I really love this about the Dutch culture, that the Dutch are not really afraid to set boundaries.
Yeah, a lot of people who come into therapy, also Dutch people that have problems with setting boundaries. It often comes with self-esteem issues, depression, a burnout. A lot of time it also comes with problems to set boundaries. So of course I'm saying try to bring it up, but this could be something that is difficult to you. And indeed I've heard also that expats find it difficult in Dutch. So that's one of the things I noticed that is common with expats, that they all want to know, how do I set my boundaries better? And then of course the guilt from their upbringing that they're not allowed to, or that it's rude, or that they're being egoistic.
How do I know if it's a good therapist? I feel like in the Netherlands the bar is quite high. I don't know, it just feels like this. And I had only one Dutch therapist, and she was amazing. But I know that there are a lot of online platforms, or with therapists that are not real therapists.
Yeah.
So how would I know?
Yeah, so psychologist in the Netherlands is not a protected title. So you can look for certain registrations psychologists have. So psychologist on its own is not a protected title. You do have a protected title that is in the Netherlands GZ-psycholoog, gezondheidszorgpsycholoog, which is healthcare psychologist. That is a protected title. I'm not a GZ-psycholoog myself. For that you need a 2 years post-master, and you also get the BIG registration, the same as doctors have. But as a psychologist, there are certain registrations someone can have. We have the Dutch Institute for Psychologists, which is in Dutch called the NIP. If someone has a registration with NIP, you know that they got a bachelor in psychology and a clinical master to be a psychologist in the healthcare business, because of course there's lots of different type of psychologists, but then you at least know that this person has knowledge of how to give therapy. There are registrations someone could have if they've done certain specialized courses in certain therapies. And there's also certain registrations you can get with that for specific beroepsvereniging is what we call it in Dutch. Professional communities, for example, if you can have a registration with the community for cognitive behavioral therapy, and then you have done a course, at least one, to have that registration. Same with trauma treatment, EMDR. If someone has done the course, is actually trained in EMDR, they will have that registration, and a lot of psychologists either link that in their personal profile, if institutes have personal profiles of psychologists, or you can also search your psychologists on LinkedIn, and you can see in their education if they have those registrations, or if they have at least a bachelor and a master in clinical psychology. So that's how I know it works in the Netherlands. So those type of registrations.
Yeah. And from the more, let's say, non-tangible perspective during the session, is there a way for me to know, for example, if I come and they, give me advice, for example, or is there anything that would signal me that something is not right?
The NIP is also the institution that makes our ethic code, and that says that really giving specific advice about choices, whether it's right or wrong or good or bad, or to make a choice, that is not necessarily allowed. For example, if say you are in a relationship and your psychologist has the idea, okay, this could be something that contributes to the complaints, your psychologist is not just allowed to say you should break up. So those type of things could be warning signs of, okay, am I getting advice that is maybe beyond the scope of actually a psychologist? A few other good signs is that if you at the beginning of the therapy make a treatment plan with your psychologist, which mention personal goals, and at least where I work, a treatment plan is also signed by both the therapist and the client. And it's also something that if you feel like, hey, we are shifting away from the topic that I came here for, or my goals, then it's something you can hold your psychologist to. But of course, also your psychologist can hold you to it if you're just constantly talking about what's going on in your life, indeed of tackling the problem. So if you make a treatment plan with personal goals, and then, they always tell us make them smart. So the specific, measurable, time-bound, the whole thing. So if that's a sign that someone is indeed working through a structure.
I remember in my own experience, it was my first psychologist, so I had no clue how it works. And one time I came to her expressing what's been going on, and she made the judgment saying like, oh, you are progressing into your illness further. And in the moment, because I was inexperienced, I did not think that it was alarming. But now in the hindsight, I feel like this is something that a psychologist should not really say.
Because in what way did she mean that? Do you remember?
Like, oh gosh, you are only getting worse in your illness. And I think it's something maybe what a psychologist sometimes is thinking. But there is a way maybe to frame it, or by asking your patient questions to let them see that this is what not working for them. But I remember it was like, yeah, I just told her what's going on, and that was her first response, that, oh gosh, you're only getting worse. You're not getting better right now, and getting more like falling deeper into your issue.
Yeah, well, as a psychologist, of course, you in our ethical code, it is also that you stay professional, so that you try to keep your personal views out of the therapy. Of course, it can sometimes happen, but my personal opinion, I think if I would say something like that, like it just slipped out, that I would apologize for that and recognize that that wasn't professional of me.
Yeah, because in the end, it's also we're humans, right? And of course, a psychologist probably has their own judgment and has their own idea, and maybe you come back home and you're like, yeah, she should definitely break up. But I don't know if it's how it works. I'm just making assumptions, but I don't think it's something that should be brought to the session.
Yeah, it can be brought to the session if, but in a professional way. So that if, for example, in terms of that relationship thing, then your psychologist might ask you, depending on the situation, what you think your partner would think of that, or how you view your relationship, things like that. But like outright saying that someone should break up, that could be pretty unprofessional, in my opinion.
Yeah, or like what value do you see in the relationship, or something like that, that really makes a person think, right?
So it should indeed stay professional. And then again, I know it's hard, but if you feel like, hey, this is really unprofessional, it's something that you could say to the psychologist. And in the end, the psychologist is there to help you. And of course, we are humans and we all have our own ideas, our own problems, our own ways of responding, our own background. And something might sometimes slip out, or you might say something that comes across to you as very weird, but it comes from a different way. I mean, some psychologists can also be really confronting. So telling you things outright that you feel like, oh, this came out of the blue. And it could be also a way to see, how do you respond? How do you deal with that? As a therapeutic technique. But it doesn't always land how you want it to, or people can get a bit offended. But hey, as therapy is also a relationship, of course, between you and your therapist, and to work in together.
So we talked about that the waiting time is around 6 to 12 weeks, and it's quite a long time, especially when you feel like you need help right now, when it's very urgent. So what can I do during this 6 to 12 weeks to survive?
To help yourself. So there are a few things that you could do yourself also if you feel like you start getting problems. You could try to read about your complaints and diagnosis. Some websites might offer self-tests. I do really recommend searching for websites that are specialized in that disorder, so that you get the correct information. So I know a lot on TikTok, Instagram, lots of people are telling you about, oh, this is ADHD or this is depression, but trying to find websites of specified to that disorder. Websites of psychological healthcare institutions often have some information about the disorder as well.
DSM manual, right?
Yeah, the DSM, I don't think it's available for free fully. You could find different things, but indeed the DSM disorders, and often, like in diagnosis, is part of the intake procedure when you go to the psychologist. So it could partly be helpful to look up information about your symptoms and what's going on, especially with tips of what to do. But on the other hand, you might feel like you have a lot of disorders then, and then you come into the psychologist office, you say, oh, I think I have this, and then it could also be partly not helpful. But knowing yourself, what's going on, understanding yourself better, maybe even already getting some online help. There's online platforms as well. I know the Dutch ones, and I try to look up if they have English versions of their websites. Sadly, I didn't find anything, but
we can link up the websites in Dutch in the video description. Probably they can translate, or there are Dutch people also watching us.
Could be Dutch people watching us as well, so we'll link some websites. But finding in your own language, websites of different disorders, and they might have self-help.
It can be helpful, and at the same time, it's also, I think, like speaking from my own experience, is when I'm in this state, it feels like I have everything. So I bought myself this book. It's also DSM characteristic in here, and went through lots of them. And I found that I have everything from depression to autism to bipolar disorder. And I'm like...
To any personality disorder in the book.
I think it's also good to leave that to a psychologist, to a therapist, while still educating yourself, but just don't try to diagnose yourself, I guess.
Don't try to diagnose yourself, because, the DSM is very much based on that things need to be abnormal, but of course, in practice, any behavior is like on the one end of the extreme, on the other end of the extreme, and in the middle of something that we call normal. So DSM says it needs to be abnormal, and it needs to impair your daily life. A lot of people, you will score on criteria of everything for a little bit, but the question is, do you have a full-blown disorder that requires treatment, that impacts you in your daily life? And if you know the DSM a bit more, a lot of disorders have similar symptoms. So low mood, almost any psychological disorder, except for mania and hypermania, have low mood. Concentration problems also, it's not only an ADHD criteria, but you see that with depression, burnout, anxiety disorders as well. So lots of symptoms are there in lots of different disorders. So of course, if you classify for a depression, you're also afraid of some stuff. You classify for anxiety, you might classify for lots of different things as well.
And it might be a thing, right? Because I know that with mental disorders there is this thing called comorbidity, or how do you call it?
Comorbiditeit, how do you say that in English? Comorbidity.
Yeah, but that basically means that if you have one, some of the symptoms overlap with another, right?
Yeah, and that's with diagnosis, it's always really important to see, okay, could it be one of the, what we call differential diagnosis? So the disorders we know have a lot of comorbidity, but having one certain disorder might also make you vulnerable for something else. That's also what comorbidity can mean, or disorders that occur together a lot. Do we see that with depression? Is a disorder that has lots of comorbidity with other types of disorders, because of course you can imagine if you've experienced something traumatic and it impacts you a lot, you might also start feeling depressed. The same as with if you have an anxiety disorder and you don't dare to go outside, at some point you might also get really sad. So especially with depression, it's really important to see, okay, is this comorbidity depression that comes from different problems, and do we need to treat the different problems and the depression might go away, or does someone have a depression with maybe some characteristics or coexisting other things?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So basically, the one thing I can do is educate myself without getting obsessive about it, without trying to self-diagnose myself, because the risk is that I can come up with a million of different diagnoses. And what else can I do?
So if you understand your symptoms a bit better, that might lead you to online platforms that offer self-help courses or social support circles, or kind of chat rooms where people can share experiences and share, maybe even solutions to simple problems. That can help a lot as well. Also, just seeking social support in your circle. Telling someone you trust, whether that is a friend, your mom, or someone else, about, hey, something's going on, I might need help with certain things. That could really help in that stage in between.
How to do it in the best way, because I think that a lot of people might start giving advice. At least in some cultures, this advice thing is just unwelcome, unsolicited advice is a thing. And I don't know if you would agree, but I always think that how can somebody else know what's best for me if I don't know what's best for me right now? So it's this tricky thing about giving advice that can make it even worse, so that you share something and then you feel like there is no space that another person can give, or that they feel like you're always being this complaining, nagging friend who they don't want to be around anymore. So is there any approach to that?
So giving good social support is, of course, not always easy. But that's also why I say someone you trust, and you could start the conversation with, hey, I have this thing I'm struggling with. Could you listen? I don't really need advice right now. I need someone just to listen to my story, because just ventilating, talking about it with someone can really help. It's what a lot of people that come to therapy with me say after the intake, just that I listened, and not because in the intake we just collect all the information and we ask a lot of questions and we don't already give advice. And some people I really like that someone just listened to me. And so that also if a friend comes to you with complaints, try to first just listen and ask them, do you need any advice? Or you could share your own story if you've experienced something similar and something that helped you, but something, of course, that helped for someone might not help for you, and the other way around.
Yeah, I really like that, and I really want to highlight this, that we can always ask if another person needs advice right now, because in the vulnerable state, your advice might do more damage than help, and might be triggering, or might be perceived in a way that, I don't know why you're saying this, because you can try journaling, but maybe I've tried journaling for now a million of times, and journaling is not the thing that I want to do. So I really love that you mentioned that.
That you have if someone comes to you with psychological complaints, you have an open mind and try to ask them questions. Why? What's going on? Can I help you? Just be open, because a lot of people say if people give unsolicited advice, it often feels like they're not being heard.
Yeah.
And one of the most important things if you're struggling is to feel like you're not alone, and to feel like you are heard. And it's okay to struggle sometimes.
Yeah, we all do. Yeah, and I feel like if we take this the way you describe, there is going to be much more trust and empathy in the world, because I feel like there are a lot of good people and they have the best intentions at heart, but they just don't have the tools to facilitate these conversations.
Yeah, and empathy is mostly about listening, not giving advice. And of course, not everybody has the time and the space or the empathic capacity to listen to someone else's complaints.
Yeah.
There might be the friend that is a really good listener, and you might also have that friend that as soon as you come with difficult problems, they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. But if you ask them, could you drive me somewhere, or I need someone to help me repair this stuff, they're immediately there for you. So there's also different people who are good at different things.
Yeah, and it's good to have this awareness what you can come to your friend with, and also don't expect, right? There is this good saying of don't judge a fish by its ability to climb the tree.
Yeah.
Right, so you cannot come to a person who is good at practical things and hope that they will.
You know that's not the best person who speaks about their feelings.
Yeah.
And then it might not be the right person to share a very deep personal story with, if you've experienced before that they are not that good at handling it. But of course, always also another good advice to not make assumptions. And you can always ask, hey, I have something that I'm struggling with. Do you have time and space to listen to me? Because it could be that someone else is struggling, and it really depends on the person. Someone who's struggling themselves can like talking to others about problems because they feel less alone. And someone who's struggling with something can be like, okay, if you tell me this now, I will carry this with me in my thoughts. And it'll be another heavy emotional burden.
With a friend of mine, we have this great communication build that when I want to share something, I always ask if he has the space for it. And I've heard many times when he said, yes, please share. And I've heard sometimes that he would say, currently, I can only give you this at the moment. I can only listen, but I'm going to be listening a bit passively, if you don't mind, because this thing happened at work right now, and I'm kind of, overwhelmed myself. So if I just listen to you passively, don't take it personal. It's not that I'm not interested. It just this and that going on.
Yeah, that's a really good way of communicating, asking if someone has space, and also you yourself saying what you need at that moment. If you need someone to listen, maybe you sometimes do need advice, and then someone can also see, okay, can I meet those needs that you have?
So I can try to educate myself. I can try to share it with somebody I trust, with this kind of rules, following this sort of rules that were outlined. What else can I do?
So there's a few basic things that a lot of psychologists also might start with, and your mental health is also connected to your physical health. So taking good care of your physical body can improve mental health. One of the things, it sounds really simple, but taking a walk every day for around 30 minutes can really help. There are even studies who have shown that taking daily walks for 30 minutes, it doesn't have to be running, you can just go on a walk, can increase your mental health and decrease the risk of depression. And so getting some physical exercise, even if it's just walking around, and even if it's 30 minutes feels like too long, getting some fresh air every day can really help. And if you feel like I can't get out of bed, I can't get myself to, that's also one of the things that you could ask your practical friend for. Do you want to go on a walk with me every Monday evening, for example? So taking walks, taking care of your sleep hygiene. We can maybe link some tips down below, because there's lots of them. I can name a few. It's trying to have a regular bedtime. It can be really difficult to maintain that, but it's something that can really help with getting proper sleep. Things like dimming your lights 2 hours before you go to bed, so your brain has time to shut down and be like, oh, even especially in summer, hey, it's getting late, it's evening, I should get ready for bed. All the hormones that have to do with sleeping will get released as well. And try not to have screens in your bedroom. Also not the phone. It's one of the most simple tips I always give to people who have sleeping problems, and they're always very mad that it works, because not having your phone in the bedroom, first of all, eliminates, of course, the distractions that it gives you. You will not be tempted to pick it up when you can't sleep and start scrolling, and then it's 3 hours later and you're still not sleeping.
And then you get this email and you start suddenly thinking.
Or you start worrying, or so that's one thing. And then just the very simplest thing can be buy an alarm clock if you use your phone as an alarm. Just buy an alarm clock that's separate from your phone. And it might also help you get out of bed. Because what a lot of people do is wake up, take the phone, be in bed for like 3 hours scrolling to social media, like, oh, now it's like 12 and I haven't gotten up yet. But if you wake up and there's not really anything else you can do in your bedroom except for sleeping, you're more inclined to get up out of bed. And even if it's, especially if you struggle with things like depression, getting out of bed.
Because when you have a good routine, it feels easier to cope with things. I noticed it even when I'm out of my routine, when I'm don't know, visiting my family, for example, or doing something that's like somewhere else, and then something happens, it's a bit harder for me to cope because I just have, I don't know, something that is predictable and that happens every day. Like I wake up, I have my breakfast, my matcha, I do some stretching, yoga, starts my work day. Then in the evening, I go to the gym or go take walks. And then when this is not there, it's sometimes harder to cope.
Yeah, for a lot of people, it can be a sign that their mental health is going down again, but it's often the first thing we try also as psychologists to see, okay, does someone have at least a stable sleeping routine, and do they have their day filled with some type of activity? How is the balance between taking breaks and relaxing, doing things for yourself, and between working? Mm-hmm. Those are just very basic things that can help to pay a little bit extra attention to, and it can sometimes be really hard to do it on your own, even to get that routine back, because even making small changes in your routine can be really difficult. One other tip I can give is if you're worrying a lot, one thing that can help is try journaling. Mm-hmm. So a few tips for worrying is, especially if you worry at night, buy a little book that you put on your nightstand, and when you feel like, oh, I have so many thoughts racing through my head when I lay in bed, try to write them down. Often people notice, hey, I'm kind of repeating the same stuff over and over again, mm-hmm. or a lot of things that I struggle with are not really solvable things. Or even if it's such a simple thing as, oh, I need to do groceries tomorrow, write it down so it can get out of your mind, mm-hmm. And you can try to let it go a bit easier.
It really helps me as well. A few years ago, I created a journal called Journal for Busy People, and basically like the whole structure is laid out for me or for anyone who buys it, and that's done exactly for this, that when I am in this state of worry, I just want to grab something and have already the structure made for me so I can write things down, the simple things that do groceries, do that, and then when I put them on paper, it doesn't feel anymore that they're occupying my brain capacity, and I can focus on something else. Yeah. So for me, it really works wonders, and a lot of people with ADHD bought it. And at first, to me, it was a surprise because I thought like you cannot concentrate. Mm-hmm. But for them, it works so well for some reason that they feel like, okay, I'm writing things down, I'm drawing lines, I don't know, it works for them somehow.
Yeah. With worrying, it's a lot of the times getting all those thoughts that feel like they're swirling around in your head out of your head and a bit more into the real world. So on paper, even if it's messy drawing lines, just getting that energy out of your head. Yeah. And then if you wrote all your things down, it can also really help to see, okay, are the things that I'm worrying about things that I can solve, so solvable problems, or things I can really not do anything about? And especially those things that you cannot really do anything about, for example, what type of weather will it be tomorrow? Or what about all these things that are going on outside of my reach, my control? Those are especially the things that you have to try to let go, or if these thoughts keep coming up, that it's best to seek a distraction. And other problems that you can solve, then of course, instead of worrying about them, you can try to work towards a solution. Because we as psychologists, we see worrying as behavior and often as coping. That people used to, not consciously, but you can use to stay passive. If I just keep thinking about this problem, it might just solve itself. But often it doesn't. It needs an action to actually be solved. And we as people, we don't have control over what type of thoughts pop into our mind. We do have control over which thoughts we can focus on. Mm-hmm. So I explain it to a lot of people. See as if your thoughts are like clouds drifting past in the sky. And you have how do you call it, those binoculars, and you can choose, okay, I focus on this one, I focus on this one, I focus on this one. And sometimes, of course, a really big dark cloud might pass by the cloud you were focusing on, and then you can choose to follow the dark cloud or wait for it to pass.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. I love this analogy. And when you were saying that worrying is a behavior, and sometimes we just choose to worry about something instead of solving it, it's also a bit of an avoidant behavior, is it?
It's a part of the avoiding coping styles. Avoiding coping, that might be like, okay, if I just keep worrying about this or keep thinking this, keep picking this problem apart, I might find the perfect solution, but there's never a perfect solution.
Yeah, I noticed that. So I have avoidant behavior of like sometimes smaller things, like I don't know, I need to call and book my dental appointment, dentist appointment, and I'm like, yeah, I don't feel like calling, you know, just like, yeah, I'm gonna be waiting, and then I feel like calling itself is just 2 minutes, and then I keep thinking I have it in my journal on Monday to call, and then it's Friday and I haven't called yet, and on Friday they don't work, and then I'm like, okay, and over the weekend I'm thinking about it, and then okay, I'm gonna do it on Monday. So I already, or I'm still learning, but I feel like I have it. I have awareness over it, and I understand that the action itself is going to take me less than the process of worrying. But I also see it with my friends that some of them avoid like big things, that they need to have this conversation with their partner over something that they feel uncomfortable, and they sort of postpone it. To me, it feels like the pain of postponing is higher than the pain of the conversation. So I don't put myself through that. I have other things that I'm guilty of, but I really see that, just curious how it works, that the people don't feel like talking about it, and then they feel like, okay, let's drag it later.
Avoidant behavior is one of the main things that we often tackle in therapy. And we as human beings, we are innate to avoid certain things that are boring, things that are scary, things that are hard. But the worst thing about avoidance is that it enables you to learn that doing the actual thing wasn't as bad as you thought. So for a lot of people, postponing a big conversation they need to have has to do with anxiety, with fear. What if it goes wrong? What if this happens? What if that happens? And the longer you worry about that, often the bigger that anxiety becomes in your head, instead of the actual thing it might be. So the opposite of avoidance, what we do in therapy, is exposure. It's okay doing that thing you find scary and seeing, is it actually as bad as I'm constantly worrying about? And of course, we all postpone things that we think are boring, or somewhere in the brain it might not be worth the effort, or it might feel like it costs a lot more effort than you get out of it in return. So things like that, it's innate to worry and postpone. And of course, if you've postponed the dentist call, I also still need to call the dentist. So those are just things that you might forget, or that you might just postpone, like, it's not really convenient to do right now. Those are normal parts of life, but especially those big things, when they build up in your mind as such a big ball of anxiety, and that it actually might not be that bad.
Yeah, indeed. It's good to realize that and keep that in mind as just awareness. What if I need more serious help, and serious quote unquote, because what do you consider serious? In I think a non-professional definition would be something more serious than just light anxiety, something like, I don't know, severe guilt feeling, or depression, or maybe suicidal thoughts, or anything like that really impedes your day and feels like maybe I'm not normal or something is wrong with me. So how does the process of looking for a more serious help looks in the Netherlands?
The first one, of course, the GP, their job is to make an estimate of, do you need to, is your problem light enough to go to the nurse at the GP's office? That's basically the bottom layer of care, is the GP's office. Then we have what we call in Dutch the basis GGZ, which is for, less severe complaints. So there you have your, what we call there's all difficult types of words, but what we call basically, how do you say that in English? Enkelvoudige stoornissen. So if you have no comorbidity, just have one problem going on, and that healthcare can be somewhere between 8 to 10, 15 sessions.
So one issue supports, I think, right?
So one issues, things that haven't impacted you for like as long as you can remember. So things that arose relatively recently or have a clear starting point. What the Dutch healthcare system does do is we work with stepped care. So if someone is not, if the GP is not sure, is it this or do you need ones above, we'll start with this. And if this works, great. If it doesn't, they'll re-refer you. And then you have the specialistic healthcare, which ranges from more complex problems that exist from a longer time, multiple diagnosis, to people who really need long-term care. That's like one step above. And then often those type of places that offer that also have a psychiatrist for medication. Because that was also one of the questions, what if I need medication? If if no psychiatrist is available at the psychologist you go to, you can also get medication through the GP. I, as a psychologist, and lots of psychologists with me, are not always a fan of trying only medication first, because the GP might give you medication during your waiting time and you come to the psychologist and you're already using something. So how does stepped care? You could also start with psychotherapy and the psychologist, and if that doesn't help on its own, you might get medication additionally. So I always explain medication as say you broke your leg, you get a cast and you get crutches. The medication is the crutches. And so it's something that helps you still walk, go through, helps your leg heal, that you can continue going while you're still injured. But it's not, psychological medication is not always something that solves the problem. It's more like a crutch. And if you get psychotherapy and medication at the same time, you could see it as, okay, that crutch will help you move forward and heal, and that's done, then the psychotherapy will help you move forward and heal, and then at some point your cast will come off, so therapy will stop, but you might still need the crutch for a while to really be able to walk on your own, and then also you can try to stop medication. Some people are on medication for a very long time, or even the rest of their lives. But it really depends on the situation.
Would it be fair to say that medication should be seen as some sort of a thing to stabilize you a bit and to get you in the state of actually receiving help?
Depending on the disorder, yes. There are, of course, things like Ritalin for ADHD can help for a problem that cannot really be solved that much with psychotherapy. Of course, you can learn how to deal with it, but if it's severe, you might need some extra to be able to function. The same with mood stabilizers for people who have bipolar disorder.
They just
it's probably something that they will have to continue to take, because that doesn't really help. Psychotherapy, of course, helps dealing with it and the thought aspect, but the actual mood swings, that might not be solvable without medication. But especially for things like anxiety disorders, depression, it can help you. Basically, the medication can help you start the recovery process in therapy. So if someone is severely depressed and has such low mood, problem getting out of bed, getting to therapy and doing the therapy homework might be a problem. So a little bit of medication that helps them do the homework, get out of bed, get more active, that helps them kickstart the recovery, might be really beneficial. The same for anxiety. But it's often not a long-term solution or a solution on its own.
So to summarize, basically, nurse would help just I should see it as sort of consultation?
It could be consultation or more like in-depth asking what the problem is than the GP in normal GP's consultation has time for, and it's their job to make an estimate. Okay, which level of care do they immediately send you to? Of course, if you get sent to the first level of care and it turns out at the end it's not enough, they can refer you to somewhere else as well.
Yeah. And the first level of care is just for one time, one thing, one issue. And if I haven't really struggled with that for a long time, but what if it's, I don't know, something as big as suicidal, but it's one issue, then I go to the next one.
Suicidality is always something that's kind of
Goes together.
Seen separately as okay. There are multiple ways to, but this is really a GP's work to see okay, what are the factors that contribute. Things that could be multiple diagnosis might be a criteria to get more severe care, severe suicidality indeed. If you've been to multiple places before, so there's a lot of criteria, and it's difficult to say, okay, which problem is severe and which problem is not. It's really on individual case.
Okay. So it's not really such as a manual as for, I don't know, nurse. I just go for something as, I don't know, I had a difficult conversation with my boss and I just need somebody to talk to. And then for this, the first level, it's something like light anxiety. And then for the next level, it's some, I don't know, severe depression.
It's not indeed a very clear cutoff.
Okay. Just by talking, by understanding your problem and by seeing how you're coping, it can be both. Because I also assume that for somebody, a difficult conversation with your boss can be just like, yeah, okay, forget about it next day. And for somebody, it could lead to performance anxiety or whatnot, and then you really need.
It also really depends on someone's social system. Of course, if you have had a difficult conversation with your boss, or maybe you even got fired, but you have friends to talk to, family to lean on, you might be fine on your own without extra help. But if you get fired and you have nobody and you're isolated, then for someone like that, it might be better to go to the GP, have someone who can help. Also find social resources.
Yeah, I think it's a very important message because I feel, and in my experience as well, it feels like if you still can function somehow, or if you are not thinking of killing yourself, then it's not serious enough. But it can be, I don't know what's objectively, but it can be seen by society as not as severe, but to you it feels severe. And that's the good enough measurement.
I think the most important criteria for yourself to seek help is, do you feel like you cannot solve it on your own? That is enough to seek for help, and then your GP will help you figure out, okay, is this indeed something that you can go to the nurse at the GP's office with to have a few talks and give you some tools and you'll be on your way again? Or is this a really serious problem that needs immediate attention? If you feel like you yourself are not able to get out of it on your own, that could be reason enough at least to go to the GP and tell what's going on.
So as we talked about, that sometimes what you're struggling with, what you're going through, impacts your life, and you cannot work, you cannot focus, you cannot concentrate, and your employer will start noticing that you're not productive, that you're slacking off, and it feels like this is the moment to tell them what's really going on. And I know that there is a huge stigma around mental health, and it's really hard to talk about what's going on with you, because it feels like if you're having a stomach pain or a cold or a virus, okay, take some days off, relax, take some rest, paracetamol. But if you are struggling with anxiety, or even if you don't know what you're struggling with yet because you have to wait for 12 weeks to get some sort of help, it's really difficult to navigate the conversation with your employer and explain what's going on. So how would you advise to approach that?
I could give a few tips, because it is indeed, there is a lot of social stigma still around mental health disorders. Like I said before, if we would view it as, hey, I fell down the stairs, my leg hurts, if it's not solved, it doesn't solve itself after 2 weeks, I might need help. The same with mental health problems. If you feel like, something impairs your functioning at work, it could really be something to look into. Also with calling in sick. So if you have a little headache, you might be able to work. If you have full-blown migraine, you cannot stand light, you cannot sit up straight, that impairs your work, you call in sick. The same with mental health complaints. If you're feeling a bit anxious and you feel like, oh, I can get to work and do it, then it's fine to go to work. But if you wake up one day and you feel you're really out of it, even if it's not because of a physical symptom, it could be a reason to call in sick. That we see mental health, being sick, feeling sick mentally, at the same value as feeling sick physically. I know a lot of employers don't do that. A lot of people don't do that. But in essence, your employer is not allowed to ask your symptoms. The only thing, how long do you expect to not be able to come into work, and if there's anything they can do to help improve. So they don't have, you're not obligated to tell them, hey, I'm calling in sick because I'm feeling too depressed to get out of bed today, or too anxious to leave the house today. That's always difficult with social stigma, because on the one hand, you could say, I am going to say that I'm trying to normalize, but it's a very difficult thing. So even just saying, oh yeah, I was sick, maybe not physically, but mentally. So you're not necessarily lying. But then we come back to the being direct and setting your own boundaries and stuff, saying, I don't feel okay sharing, but just saying that you were sick, it might be a mental sick day, but you were still sick and you were unable to do your work. And those discussing mental health complaints with an employer can also be very overwhelming. One advice is, because of stigma, it might not be the best thing to bring up during like a job interview. And if you're thinking about sharing your mental health problems with your employer, ask yourself, do these complaints influence my ability to do my work? If the answer is no, if you're struggling with something privately, but you're still able to do your work okay, you might not necessarily have to share. And ask yourself, would I feel more comfortable, or would I worry less if my employer knew? And if the answer to both those questions is yes, then it's okay to share. And then one more tip for sharing is that talk about the things that you need to do your job, and the things that might impair you to do your job, not about your diagnosis, because that's the thing that people will start making assumptions about.
Such a difficult topic. I know someone who, exactly from the point of, I don't want to stigmatize it, and his big value is being honest, and he wanted to be honest with his employer about what's going on. And he's struggling with performance anxiety, and he gets overwhelmed very easily when there is a lot of tasks thrown at him. And he would take sick days, and when the question was asked, why do you need that? He would be saying this performance anxiety, and that I felt anxious, I could not work, I felt overwhelmed. And it backfired at him, because his company, even though it's quite an open company, it's a Dutch company with lots of expats, and it feels like the culture there is quite open. They just did not understand. They thought that he's lazy and that he's making things up, and he's not, how should I put it, making something, there is an expression in my own language, like making something big out of something small, like weak, you're being weak, you're exaggerating.
It's very unfortunate that a lot of places indeed still work like this, and that's also why it might at this point in where our society is be important to tell your employer, not necessarily I was struggling with anxiety or I have performance anxiety, but tell them, hey, in order to function better in my work, I might need this. And it could be someone to tell to give, or less tasks, or not less time-bound tasks, or more time on tasks because you struggle with things, instead of focusing on, this is my problem. So try with the employer, especially try to focus on the solutions. What could help you better cope with those complaints, and what can your employer do for you in that way? And when you notice, hey, this, it's not something, or I don't know, it's not something my employer can fix, that might also be a sign to ask for help elsewhere with these complaints.
I shared with my audience that I'm about to have an interview with you and ask them what they want me to ask during this interview. One of the questions was, what's better, online therapy or offline?
So my personal preference is for face-to-face therapy. For me personally, I find it easier to connect with someone. You can read their whole body language, things like that. But that really is a personal preference, because in certain cases, online therapy might be necessary. And there are studies which suggest that there is actually no difference between online therapy or face-to-face therapy. So it might really come down to someone's own personal preference. They feel like, hey, online therapy might be good for me because my therapist lives far away, or I want therapy in my own language. And if someone's like, yeah, I think I need face-to-face. So it might come down to online, to personal preference.
Yeah, I tried both, and with offline therapy, what I learned is that I find it really therapeutic during the bike ride to my therapist, just reflect upon like, okay, what I'm going to talk about. Because sometimes with online therapy, I just send the email 2 minutes before the therapy starts, and then I do try to make a time of 10 minutes or 15 minutes to think about my intention for the therapy. What do I want to discuss? And how am I feeling right now? But I have to admit that it doesn't always work. And sometimes I send the email 2 minutes before the therapy starts.
Yeah.
So I don't have this time buffer to actually
reflect. It's something I noticed from personal experience as well, that online therapy can be something that people fit in between all kinds of other things, and they're really busy, and then it's like, oh yeah, now I have therapy, and then after this I immediately go do something else. I find it personally easier to connect face to face, see body language, things like that. And I'm someone who uses the whiteboard a lot, which is difficult with most online platforms of video call, to actually use a whiteboard together. And also to do exercises. Some therapy might have you doing exercises with your therapist in the room, and that's a lot more difficult when you're online.
Yeah, I love the point that you mentioned, that kind of hinting at the therapy is not a magic pill, it's not a magic solution. Your therapist is not the one who's going to do the work for you.
No.
Because in the end, it's up to me to reflect before the therapy session and after the therapy session, and also think about how I can implement the solutions. Because if I'm 1 ear in, 1 ear out, it's not really...
That it's not... So also, I tell a lot of people, just talking and ventilating about your problems, that's not therapy. Therapy is about seeing, okay, what is actually going on, getting new insights, and actively trying to do something with tools and changing things. So that might be also something to expect from therapy.
Another question from the audience was about who should I call in case if a psychological event becomes physical, if they experience dizziness or heightened heartbeat,
If you feel like you need help directly with with a psychological crisis or something that's going on, it's always best to call the GP or outside of office hours. In Dutch we call it the huisartsenpost, which is basically some place often linked to a hospital you can call when your GP is out of office. So during the evening, during the weekends, to see if something is going on with the crisis. Of course, if you feel like you're in immediate danger, whether that's physical or not, call the emergency services.
Okay.
If you are in therapy, this could be something to discuss with your therapist. Different therapists might have different rules about that. Also, depending on where you get therapy, there might be hotlines you can call also outside of working hours at your therapist practice. Some therapists say, okay, if something's going on, you could always call me. Not everybody does that, but especially if you feel like it's getting physical, don't be afraid to contact GPs, or even if it's severe, the emergency line.
It's I don't know if I can call it normal, but it sometimes does happen indeed that anxiety goes with an increased heartbeat.
So if you are not sure, am I having heart problems or a panic attack, you could call the GP or even the emergency services, and they can come. They might say, hey, this was a panic attack, not a heart attack, but it's always better to be safe than sorry in those cases. And then I have a few other things that you can call and you can get direct contact with volunteers that can help you, basically listen to your story and also give advice. And instances you can call for 24/7. So the Dutch suicide hotline is 113.
But it's not only for suicide, right?
This can be any psychological crisis as well. If you just feel like, okay, I'm getting super overwhelmed, I might be in danger in some way or another, then you can also call them. It's not necessarily only for suicide.
There are people that are trained to receive these calls.
Trained to receive these calls.
They're not psychologists.
Could be. Could be. I think lots of psychology students work there in next to the studies, for example, but also trained volunteers. People used to be psychologists. It's really different. Can be, but they indeed are trained to receive these calls, to refer you to the right place if you need some help, to talk you through it, to give you advice, or give just someone who listens to your complaints.
Yeah, that's really good to know that this help is available.
Make sure to give you the links to the English versions of those websites, because there are multiple kind of volunteer help centers in the Netherlands, and I look them up and see which ones did have an English version of the website, because not all of them do, sadly, but the suicide hotline certainly does.
That's good to know. Yeah, so I can call them, and who else? You mentioned that there is something else I can call.
Yeah, and there's for youth between 18 and 24 years old, there's another website you can go to. I think you can also call them, which is called allesoké.nl.
Okay.
But we'll link them below. Also, some specific ones about if you've experienced sexual violence. They also have lots of research, lots of information. And also if you feel like you or someone in your environment is in danger of abuse, domestic violence, there are instances you can call for advice or reporting abuse.
Yeah.
So we'll link those.
That's good to know. I think it's really good to know for experts, because we come here and we are not really sure what we can do here, where we can look for help, if help is available, or if we're asking for something outrageous. So it's good to know that there is help.
So use GP's phone number, and if you have a GP in the Netherlands, ask them about the huisartsenpost number, because that might depend on your region.
Oh, okay. So it's
which
not
one that is. It's not a general thing.
Yeah.
It's depends on the region.
How to get diagnosed in the Netherlands with some mental health illness such as ADHD and depression?
And diagnosis is often part of the intake procedure. If you have a referral for insured healthcare, they first do an intake in which you can get the diagnosis. If you are specifically looking to get, for example, diagnosed with ADHD, autism, there are in the Netherlands places specified in those disorders that might do diagnostics on them. We can also link a few things in the description.
I've heard that it's quite hard to get diagnosed with some of the mental health illnesses in the Netherlands. Is it? It's hard to get like a full diagnosis.
Well, to get a full diagnosis, like things like ADHD and autism, also personality disorders and things like that, there really diagnostic research needs to be done. So you'll have to have a lot of interviews, often also an intelligence test, because those things are the disorders that can be really comorbid with each other or overlap a lot. Is it ADHD? Is it autism? Is it maybe even trauma? So something that could overlap a lot is borderline personality disorder, ADHD and bipolar disorder. Things like impulsiveness and concentration problems can really overlap in those disorders. And for that to be diagnosed, you need to do a complete psychological evaluation of someone to know what's actually going on.
I've heard that in the Netherlands it's strictly regulated, so it's not easy to just get a diagnosis in the Netherlands.
No, often it's not possible to go somewhere and say, hey, I want diagnostic research to be done for this disorder. That often doesn't happen because, of course, it takes a lot of time as well. And the same with that we discussed, don't over-research the disorder you might have, that people get blindsided and think, I have ADHD. Well, it could be something completely different. Yeah. And if you then spend weeks or maybe even months doing ADHD research, and it's like, well, it might not be ADHD. The end, that could, be something else indeed.
I can assume that for people who have never done therapy, they don't really know what they can expect from it. If it's something that really can help them, or if it's something that can just alleviate their problems a little bit. So I understand that it's a very broad question, what you can expect from therapy, but if you could give us some guidelines on that would be great.
Yeah, so most therapy does follow a similar structure, and it always starts with an intake. And the intake is your psychologist will ask you a lot of questions about what's going on in your life, about the problems, to know what's going on, and also for things like diagnosis. That will be important. Then after that, therapy, the actual sessions will start. And often what you can expect in the beginning is that you delve a little bit deeper into the problem to, together with your psychologist, figure out, okay, what's exactly going on and what things exactly need to change. And then you'll go into the actual change part. Depending on the type of therapy you get, most people in the Netherlands, for most problems in the Netherlands, we will use cognitive behavioral therapy. So kind of depending on the type of therapy you get, you'll probably also get homework. So exercise to do at home, things to think about at home, things to write down at home. You might even do exercise with your psychologist in the session, things like that. And in the end, you'll have often a little bit of fallback prevention, just repeating, okay, what did you learn? What did you get out of it? So that's a bit of a similar structure. Yeah. It's also something that just ventilating, just telling a therapist what happened during the week is not really therapy. That's more ventilation. So therapy, if you would call it core therapy, is aimed at change.
And it's absolutely normal to have regression sometimes, right? Yeah. Because our psyche is smart and it's very protective. So it's not the process, the progress doesn't look like this, but it's more like...
The progress most often doesn't look linear. Even after therapy, you might still have some fallbacks. It's just very difficult to change your patterns of behavior that have existed for a long time, or your way of living if you've been doing for quite a long time. Because that is what therapy does aim at. Also, don't expect all the problems to be solved at the end of therapy. Therapy really aims to give you tools to solve the problems, and at some point it is often, okay, now just continue using the tools, getting better at using the tools, and for your complaints to fully disappear.
For example, I think this thing what expats struggle with, not maybe the most, but one of the things that they struggle with the most is feeling homesick. So if I come to the Netherlands and I'm struggling with integration and struggling with this feeling like, oh, I left my family behind, I really miss them, I left my friends behind, I miss them, and then I come to therapy with that, because it's a valid issue, right? I can come to therapy with that. I shouldn't think that it's very small and everybody struggles with that.
Your therapist will probably not be able to completely eliminate your homesickness or missing your family, because that's also the normal part of moving away. It all depends on dealing with that differently. It's the same with negative emotions. Some people come to therapy and they say, I don't want to ever be scared again. And I have to tell them that is not possible, because fear is a normal part of life. If we look at recovery in a recovery-oriented way, as I look at it as well, it's according to a doctor, Gershom Kloens, and he said recovery is basically about restoring a personal balance in someone's life. That is a balance between all the extremes in someone's life that are constantly changing. So between, for example, the extremes of all the things that are going well and all the things that are not going well, about positive emotions, negative emotions. If someone comes to me with, I never want to feel afraid again, then I have to explain, well, that it's not possible, because fear is part of, the human experience. And if we want to look at this balance in life, basically, there are so many aspects in life are made up of two dimensions, two extremes. So we can, on the one hand, we can have safety, feeling safe, and on the other hand, feeling unsafe. So we see that psychological healthcare problems often arise when someone feels like they're stuck on one side. So this could be anxiety problems. You always feel like you're unsafe, even though there's not really anything going on. But asking, I never want to be afraid again, would say, well, I want to be only on this side. And now in the Netherlands, we're a lot about the Gulden Middenweg, which basically means you always want to be, well,
The golden middle.
Golden middle, somewhere in the middle. So not really safe, not really unsafe. So always kind of fine.
Yeah.
And
that something can happen in life that can bring me here, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that just my permanent state, but something can happen and then I feel unsafe.
Yeah. Because it is about learning how to move in this whole spectrum. So indeed, it is very good to sometimes feel extremely unsafe in certain situations. When you're walking alone at night and you hear a gunshot or something, it's better you feel afraid and run away. But when you're safe in your bed, maybe even cuddled up with your dog and your partner and watching a movie, you want to be able to feel completely safe and taken care of. And this is basically restoring this balance, so not getting stuck on one side anymore, but restoring the balance and being able to find the whole spectrum. And this is with a lot of things. So feeling safe, feeling unsafe, feeling happy, feeling sad, taking care of yourself and taking care of other people. Feeling like you're a worthy person and sometimes feeling unworthy.
Okay.
Being able to trust and being able to distrust someone.
Wow.
And it's about this whole spectrum. So self-esteem problems could, for example, be if you only get stuck on the feeling unworthy side and you never feel like you're good enough. If you always feel like you are the good enough person and never are able to feel, hey, I did something wrong, this was bad of me, then we would get more to the narcissistic side.
Yeah, right. Because being here, basically feeling unworthy, can be a good lesson, right?
Yeah.
It can be like, okay, let me reflect on what did I do wrong, or what can I do better next time?
Exactly. If you make a mistake and someone suffers because of that mistake, or someone comes to you being like, hey, this thing you did was really not okay, it's good to feel like, oh, that's bad of me. But you have to be able to wake up basically the next day and be like, okay, or say sorry, mend your mistakes, stuff like that, and feel in your job worthy again. Because that's happened with self-esteem. Something happens and people are stuck on feeling unworthy. They feel like they do nothing well. So this is about the balance. The same as choosing for yourself. Sometimes saying, well, it's really inconvenient, the thing you ask of me, I can't do it. And other times, in other situations, saying, okay, this is really inconvenient, but I will this time choose for you.
From what you're saying, it feels like it takes a lot of flexibility in my psyche to move through this cycle.
Mental flexibility is one of the things that can really help you recover, or that you will work towards with your psychologist. Because people often see it as either or. Either I choose for myself and I'm egoistic, or I choose for others and I sacrifice myself. It's a very black and white thinking, and that is often what we aim to solve in recovery. It's not this that if you choose for yourself you are immediately egoistic, but that being able to be on this whole spectrum makes you very flexible and makes you also resilient for the future. So if something happens that makes you feel really unsafe, that you know, hey, I can also move back to this other part. The same with worthy and unworthy. And knowing both these dimensions, also pleasant emotions, negative emotions, are part of human experience. Because, for example, a lot of people with depression get really scared when they start feeling sad again. But that might not be the next depression. Being sad is also part of life if something happens. So being able to bounce back from it and move again on this spectrum.
It's really interesting about this spectrum because it shows that there is no one solution that fits all. There is no one thing that fits all. There is no this like, okay, you're going to do this and then you're going to feel worthy for the rest of your life, or you're going to choose for yourself for the rest of your life, because it's basically also situation related. If I feel low myself and I'm going through something myself and I don't have the space, I might choose myself, I might choose my own recovery, and then from that full state I can help others and then can move back in the spectrum.
Exactly. So being able to be flexible, not black and white thinking, taking into account situations or the way other people might view things, because that's often how we get stuck on one side. Have like the tunnel vision, the black and white, it's either it's safe or it's unsafe, or it's me or it's them, and there is no room for compromising anymore because we get so stuck on something. So that's something that can really,
and I guess when people feel constantly unsafe, it's some sort of PTSD, right?
Constantly unsafe. It's often anxiety disorders, trauma indeed, that will make you be on that side indeed. So there's could be a different way of looking at mental disorders outside of diagnosis, on all types of spectrums of life. Which are you stuck on some side? Could be. We see that a lot of people with self-esteem issues, they self-sacrifice, they feel unworthy, maybe they even distrust others, and they feel unsafe. You could look at it like that as well.
Okay, so it can be a spectrum or like a set of these characteristics to get diagnosed with.
This is not used for diagnosis, but this could be something that could be really insightful for yourself to see, hey, am I able to move through that other spectrum? Am I also able to not self-sacrifice and sometimes sacrifice other people to choose for myself, or sacrifice time with other people to completely choose for myself.
That's
So these dimensions is a different way of looking at psychological problems, and see, okay, where do we need to focus on? So if you're stuck on unsafe, okay, you need to figure out how can we make sure you can feel safe again. The same with if you're stuck on sacrificing yourself, how can we practice choosing for yourself in, of course, a way that fits with that particular person.
Yeah, and therapy helps and gives tools to see, instead of this black and white thinking, black and white picture of the world, to be more flexible and recognize the situation and recognize my reaction and recognize what this means for me, and choose my reaction basically from that.
That's basically what cognitive behavioral therapy aims to do, is give you a different perspective of your thoughts and emotions and of what's happening, and then of course with different perspective comes different actions, which in the long term will change the way you experience things as well.
Yeah, and from different perspective, it can also be how I frame my thoughts, right? It can be the same reality, but just my framing is different this time. Another question from the audience was how to cope with burnout and handle it with your employer.
Yeah, so we already talked a little bit about how to handle mental health complaints with your employer. I think the same is part for burnouts, that if you feel like there's a day that you can't, you're too overwhelmed, you're too tired mentally to go to work, then it's okay to call in sick for a day. It's okay to even stay in bed for a day, but it might be nice to explain something about burnout, also on how to cope with it, what to do when you call in sick for a day or a few days, you feel like you're having burnout complaints. And also try to discuss it with your employer, because if there is something they can do to help you prevent you from being sick long term, then it often helps your employer as well than becoming sick long term and really falling out.
Yeah.
All right. So the way we view burnout is when you have exhausted all your mental resources. So your mental battery is empty. And basically we draw the mental battery as having two parts: the normal part and your reserve. So what happens normally, if you wake up, your battery is full and you use energy throughout the day, then you go back to sleep and the battery becomes full again. Now, there might be those days that you're really stressed and you need a little bit of extra energy, and then you can use your reserve. But if you go to sleep the next day, your battery won't be full. So if you use this much energy, the next day you wake up over here. You will have used that resource. And if you continue doing this same amount of energy, the next day you'll wake up even lower and even lower and even lower and even lower until you're almost empty, and that's burnout. Because this type of energy, the reserve energy, is something that will only be recharged by doing things that give you energy. That could be anything, but for a lot of people it's hobbies, having time with friends, relaxing, sports, things like that. So things that give you energy, activities that make you feel happy, activities that give you life satisfaction. So for a lot of people, how a society works, it's during the weekend they do things that they like, and then on Monday morning they feel okay again to go through the week, and then we recharge again. So that's with burnout. It's really important to find that balance again between working and expanding energy and making time to recharge that energy.
Because basically burnout is when my reserve is empty.
Yeah, or you always have a bit of reserve, but your battery is empty, you start over here. So you need to immediately tap into your reserve of the day, which makes you unable to wake up rested. Because the next day you're at rock bottom again and you'll need to use that reserve again. So to fill up the whole battery again, we need to do things we enjoy. So it's something that might make you feel guilty, but if you call in sick for burnout reasons, it's okay to stay in bed for a day, feel like you need sleep, but you also need to do something that recharges your energy. Even if it's just taking a walk, or still going to do sports, or still, even though you call in on sick, going to have a fun evening with friends. Of course, that comes with a lot of guilt, but that is something that will help you recover from burnout.
Okay, basically this fun evening with friends I should just see as
something that recharges
my
that.
reserves.
Yeah. And of course, if you're really deep in burnout, then things that are passive, for example, watching Netflix. A lot of people feel like, oh, I'm so tired, I'm going to watch Netflix. But watching Netflix is an activity that doesn't cost energy, but it often doesn't recharge anything either. So if you have your energy levels, it will kind of stay like this. And often activities that will recharge this energy costs a little bit to begin with. So getting ready for that party and stuff like that, it costs some energy, but in the long run, you will gain. So the hurdle can be quite big, that instead of going to lay on the couch, watch Netflix, that you take your favorite book, or that you go draw or paint or go take a walk with your dog or something like that.
Okay. And so basically this situation that you're describing is that when I just need a day or two to recover, and this is when my reserve is quite low, how does it work for people who depleted their reserve to the extent that they need, I don't know, I've heard stories that somebody is on the burnout leave for a year.
And then basically, then you have such little energy that the smallest things that could recharge you, this hurdle feels like too big. And that's when you might need to go to a psychologist. This is also the point where burnout can switch over into a depression, where there's the risk of that happening. And that's the point where you might need to go to a therapist to figure out together, okay, what are the little things we can do to start recharging the energy until you have enough energy to go out with friends again. Because when you're completely depleted, then even the activities you used to enjoy that were really fun feel like too much effort. And then you need to start really small, and that's often something a psychologist will help you with.
So the process for now, from what I'm hearing, is this, that when I feel depleted, I call in sick. 1-2 days, I stay in bed or whatever I feel like I need to do. What happens? Because I feel like in this moment it's hard to determine how much time I'd need. Is it 1 or 2 days, or is it a month?
It really depends on where you are at the level. But if you feel like you're struggling with burnout, you're feeling less energized when you wake up, then it might be time to prioritize in your life certain things that you know give you energy. And for certain days that might mean calling in sick to work and just sleeping in, going to take a walk, and then go do your normal sports that you wouldn't do, of course, when you had a fever or something like that. But when you feel like, hey, I'm using a lot of energy, waking up less refreshed, that's the time to try to prioritize some things that make you feel better. And then not watching Netflix or something.
Okay, so I tried doing that for 1, 2, 3 days, and I still don't feel it helped.
Then that might be the time to indeed seek for further help.
So I seek for further help, and then in the meantime, how do I approach it with my employer? Just is this the moment when I need to explain that I am experiencing burnout, or do I first need to gain some clarity from a professional and then approach it?
How it often works is that if you call in for sick longer, your employer will make an appointment with you and the company doctor, and then with the company doctor you can discuss all your problems, and also say, well, I already went to the GP and got help, or yes or no, or the company doctor might even point you in the direction of this could be the type of help you can get. So if you feel like, okay, I'm 3 days at home and I've done some things, but it doesn't work, or I'm only getting worse. That could be the time. Also, when your employer calls in, hey, when do you think you'll be back? You say, well, I noticed that I'm completely drained and I might be struggling with burnout.
Yeah.
And then they will get you to the company doctor. You can get help yourself. And it might mean that you're on sick leave for a while with your company when you're in burnout.
Can I trust the company's doctor? So it's still the person who is in neutral, or he's more like on the company side?
Doctor, in my experience as a psychologist, because we sometimes, of course, get letters from company doctors asking for information stuff. The company doctor is the aim of the company doctor is to get you back to work. That's the aim of the company doctor. Which means, as a psychologist, I sometimes feel the need to slow them down, be like, okay, this person is not able to get back to work yet, or not able to get back to work these hours yet. But it really depends on the company doctor. The company doctor is someone who stands in between you and your employee, and of course they are employed. They're not literally employed by the employer, but your employer talks to them and say, okay, this company doctor, we want this person to get back to work. So that's their task, to help you get back to work as soon as possible.
But I can be honest with them in a sense that they're not going to share any information that I don't want them to share with my employer.
As far as I know, they're not allowed to share all your personal inside information with the company without your permission. That's the same as why your employer is not. You're legally not obligated to answer questions about what kind of symptoms you have. That's employee protection in the Netherlands. That's also the same way it works. The same for the company doctor and the psychologists and stuff like that. But that's more of a legal issue, and it's not my field of expertise. But as an employee, you're pretty protected against those type of things. Also, you cannot be fired when you are in sick leave.
Only if my contract ends.
Only if your contract ends, your contract ends. But your employer cannot say, okay, now you are sick, we don't want you anymore, goodbye. That's employee protection in the Netherlands.
That's good to know.
Because in some countries it is, if you call in sick for too long, they just fire you without a reason. But that's, you're protected against that in the Netherlands.
The final question, which is an interesting question. How do I find peace?
Yeah, that is indeed an interesting question. I don't think that's a question I can answer. I wish I knew that how we could all find peace. It's not a question I can answer without any context. So if you would ask this question to a psychologist, they would ask you, what do you mean by finding peace? And what would peace personally mean to you?
Yeah, because it's quite personal, right? It's peace can be a different thing for many people. And
it could be stop worrying. It could be just peace with myself. It could be anything. So it's too broad to answer such a question.
Thank you very much, Kim, for joining us. It was really insightful. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. And I'm happy to give a message and spread some awareness about mental health. I think it's really important as well.
Thank you.